Both of you guys are going to say Trump can't win, so I don't know who's going to argue with whom on this, but let me start with you, Steve. I would say at this point, and there's a big piece by Jerry Seib, some of Sanders' criticism, it could be hurting Hillary with independents at this point. At least that's the thrust of the piece. Are you worried about that?
Well, I mean, the tone of the campaign on the Democratic side has certainly gotten nastier, and there is some concern about the kinds of things Bernie Sanders is saying and whether those are going to be recirculated in the general election. But, you know, ultimately, the election will be a choice between two candidates, and Hillary Clinton, when that choice is made, actually looks a lot better than Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, as an NBC poll shows. So a little concern about the Sanders campaign and the negative tone, but in the general election, I think Democrats right now are feeling pretty good.
Steve, do you think that we've made this point a few times, when we know who the president is in 2016 and whomever it is takes office, 50% of the country is going to just have a visceral, I hate to use the word hate, but a deep dislike of whoever the president is. That's unfortunate, I think, for us as a country. You think eventually we'd start liking Hillary if it's her?
Well, I mean, I think politics today is polarized, and you see that in the polls that you're looking at, and politicians today, establishment politicians in particular, just aren't very popular with voters, and Hillary Clinton is no exception. I think at the end of the day, you know, America has problems to solve, and we only have one president at a time. It's either going to be Hillary or Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or probably Ted Cruz. And you know, at some point, you know, Congress and the president are going to have to decide whether or not they want to solve problems or keep fighting and drive the partisan divide even further. I suspect and I hope that if Hillary Clinton is the president, she's going to actually reach out. She's got a history in the Senate of working across the aisle, and I'm hopeful that she'll do that as president as well.
Sarah, at this point, you know, I don't know if I refer to you as an establishment Republican, but I've talked to you and others about, you know, you have a hand that's dealt, and, you know, so you just heard what your hand is. It's not a 5-card hand, it's a 4-card hand.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you got Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz. So what are you doing? You're out of here on this card game, and you're going home and just thinking about Mitt Romney or something? What do you do?
Well, I think, look, there's still a lot to play out in the Republican primary process. Donald Trump, you know, should pick up 80 delegates tonight in New York, and he'll have a big night. But he probably comes up about 60, maybe 70 delegates short at the convention. And then the question is Cruz really organized enough to get it on the second or the third ballot? And if that's the case, he will, in fact, be the nominee, which I think is probably the most likely bet at this point. But if he doesn't, then I think all hell's going to break loose, and anything at that point could happen. And there's all this chatter about the Rules Committee and what that means, and people forget the Rules Committee can meet throughout the week and change the rules if it's required
but doesn't
to do
all
so
hell
to
break
move
loose? The second the Rules Committee meets, the whole game
is... It's going to be a really rough and tumble summer for Republicans. No matter how this plays out, it's just going to be a really bad,
okay, so they settle on Cruz as this just for argument's sake, because it could be Trump just as easily, but they settle on Cruz. Will you have a full-throated defense of Ted Cruz? Will you canvass for him?
Sure.
Will you vote for him?
I'll vote for Ted Cruz for sure. I used to work with Ted. Ted is a very bright and capable person. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about his personality and his relationship with colleagues, and leaving that aside, you know, the average voter doesn't pay attention to those things. They don't know the ins and outs of what happens in Washington. And Ted is a conservative. I think his rhetoric is wrong on some issues, but he is largely in line with previous nominees of the Republican Party, aside from his rhetoric, particularly on immigration. He's a conservative. He'll have a tough time beating Hillary Clinton in this economy, frankly, as would any Republican right now, I think, and given where President Obama's approval rating is. It's lining up strongly for the Democrats, but it is early. Yeah, I'd be happy to support Ted Cruz. He's not my first or second choice, but I would enthusiastically vote for him.
Or your third.
Well, that's weird, because, I don't know, a lot of people talk about the economy as not lining up necessarily for the incumbent. And also, when we were, I guess, at 47 or 46 on the president's popularity, that portended So a couple of points makes a difference where you think that no Republican could win at this point?
Well, I think if John Kasich's strategy to win the hearts and minds of delegates on the floor because he's in the race works, he's a strong candidate against her. In fact, he beats her in many polls. I think there's other young, dynamic candidates in the Republican Party that would, given her unpopularity, where you could see a situation, emerge where a Republican beats her, even in I mean, there's mixed signals on the economy. You talk about them all the time on this program.
Right.
But overall, the consumer confidence has trended upward over the last several months, and that usually means the incumbent party wins.
I don't see the John Kasich. I don't see how that works. I mean, John Kasich, Jim Gilmore.
Jim Gilmore. He's still in. He's still in the race.
Rubio's out of the race. He's got more delegates than Kasich. How are you
He does. It's very narrow.
Straight face going to go to. But when Kasich points out that Trump doesn't have 60% of the, 60% Republicans don't support him. 95% of Republicans haven't supported Kasich.
Look, it's a very, very narrow path, and the interesting thing for Kasich right now is
like
he almost needs
wire, that narrow path.
It is. I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's we're talking about scenarios here that are unlikely, but possible.
I just made the other point. Kasich keeps bringing up the general election polls. Bernie Sanders beats everybody, including, it beats by wider margins than Hillary. But so general election polls at this point in time are almost they're like popularity contests.
They are largely meaningless, but the contours of the race and the general election are being set right now. Yeah. And they're being set now because of where the economy sits. They're being set now because of what's happening in these primaries. And it has been a race to the bottom. And as it relates to John Kasich, the only path for him, which is very narrow, is that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz basically get to parity, and neither of them get enough.
Right.
And then they deadlock on the floor. And then then if that happens, which, again, I think Ted is the most likely scenario at this point. But if it were to deadlock on the floor, all hell's going to break loose, and then anything can happen. And he at least has the argument that I'm in the race. I'm running. I've been running.
Right. Well, 16 guys have.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I actually did have a moment of clarity where I said, I can't worry about this anymore. I'm just going to become a limousine liberal. I've got mine. What do I care if we do any of these pro-growth things?
You're welcome. You're always welcome.
Yeah, I know you left the lights on for me to come in, but
that's right.
If I were, I would look across the aisle and I'd just be laughing at when I've seen so many establishment Republicans just throw in the towel and say, it's going to be Hillary. Let's just try and keep the Senate. Maybe. I mean, you just chuckle when you see that, don't you? You must love this, that they're ready to take their ball and go home and not even playing this because it's Trump, who they feel worse about than Hillary.
Yeah, and they don't seem to like Ted Cruz very much more.
No, they don't. It's funny. It's like, what happened? I'm
going to give a shout-out to Larry Sabato, who's a professor at the University of Virginia, who writes a great little piece called The Crystal Ball. And he, according to his analysis, if the Democratic performance, if the Democratic vote goes up 1 point nationwide, Democrats pick up 9 congressional seats. If it goes up 2, they pick up like 35. And if it goes up 3 points, just 3 points, the Democrats would pick up 56 seats. So you're going to hear a lot more Republicans who are going to start saying, we have to let the presidency go and worry about, the Senate and the House, because if Larry Sabato and his numbers are right, and he's a very good political scientist, you could be looking at some down ballot problems for Republicans that are pretty extreme.
I think that's the difference between Trump and Cruz. Trump probably costs us much more than Ted does. Ted may lose to Hillary, but I don't think he's going to cost us the House and probably not the Senate.
But Trump would, right,
Sarah?
I think at this point, based on the numbers, Trump would cost us at least the Senate.
You're in a dark place. You're in a dark place. I don't know what I can do to help you.
The latest general election I saw was Clinton 46, Cruz 44.
Yeah.
So that's
within a margin of error.
Yes, and it's also months and months away from what we've even chosen.
All right, Steve and Sarah, thank you.